I'm not going to say anything about Anne. I think you could all, you all know how to use the internet. You've probably researched this. I think the only important thing that few people know is Anne's the recipient of this year's Hannah Arendt Prize, which we're very pleased about. It's good to see it's going to someone who really does deserve it. With regards to Brave New Europe, our website, we had sheets, so you know all about that. You can read about it. It's a very special honor to have Anne here because actually this series of talks was her idea. She doesn't quite know it, but it was. Because when we began Brave New Europe, we wrote after doing a lot of research, trying to find the best authors and the best experts in Europe who also have a radical view on things. We'd written her and said, well, we're going to have this platform trying to counter the neoliberal discourse. And would you like to join us? And she said, fortunately, yes. But then she wrote one thing. She says, it's disappointing that the website will not be translated into German. Impact is most needed. And how right she was. Unfortunately, she also wrote being an economist, said, you probably don't have any money for that, do you? And we wrote, no, we don't. But then this idea was there, we have to do something in Germany. And this is our first step. There's this series of talks. Now, a bit about the talks. We aren't here. We are not ideologues. We are not going to tell you what to do, what to think. In fact, to the contrary, we're going to bring lots of people here with different opinions. It might be a bit confusing at first because they're going to, Anne will confirm this, if you have a panel of 5 economists, by the end of the evening you have 6 opinions. And what we sort of, to use a metaphor, we see ourselves as sort of an economics ironmonger. We're going to provide you with lots of tools, tell you how to use them, but we won't tell you when to use them and in which manner. That will be up to you. So this is an attempt to just provide you with information. Don't think we have our own private or secret program. We're almost finished, good. I just want to let you know, unexpectedly, we're having Adam Tooze here in Berlin on the 28th and 29th of September. He's wrote a brilliant book about it's called Crashed. It's also in German in the meantime. It's on the bottom of the sheets that have the Brave New Europe sheets on the bottom. There's the 28th is in English, the 29th is in German. There'll be no simultaneous translations. So just come to the evening that you best like. So we can complete this now with thanking people. First, we'd like to thank Anne for coming. We'd like to very much thank Monarch for having us. It was extremely difficult to find a room, although we started 6 months ago. And it was just, they were very, very kind to take us on. Then, of course, Helle Panke, who's more or less paying for all this. And this is, you have no idea how expensive this sort of event is, especially with the simultaneous translation. Then we'd like to thank the Netzwerk Plurale Ökonomik, a group of heterodox economic students who are part of organizing this. And then I'm supposed, on Oxy, which is a website and a weekly newspaper, I think. And they're filming this, so this will be on YouTube. So if there's something you've missed, you can always go back. Then I'm also supposed to inform you there are books on sale from Anne, her most recent book, in English and in German. And then the very last thing is probably the one nearest to my heart right now, is Brave New Europe is financed purely by donations. At the end of the talk, when you go out, there will be someone with a tin, Brave New Europe, collecting donations, because we are participating and paying for the costs of the translation, and it's really money we don't have. So we'd be very appreciative if you could help us out. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and it's absolutely wonderful to be here. I feel it's an incredibly hip place to be for a woman of my age and distinction. My grandchildren would be very impressed. So I thank you for this and for being here. So I thought I'd start by talking about secrets. I need to tell you that I have promised the translators I would stick to my notes, and I haven't given them this, so I apologize to them straight away. But I thought I'd start with secrets, because when I was last in Berlin, I went to the National History Museum, and it is a fabulous museum. I really enjoyed it. And I picked up a book there about a German woman at the end of the war who was coping with the aftermath as the war was ending. And she writes this amazing autobiographical account of her life at the end of the war. And she explains how she learned that she had to sleep with the Russian soldiers who came into Berlin in order to get food. And then she got smart and realized that if she slept with the major, then she'd get more food and she could feed the people in the block, right? So she writes about how she strategizes around this in order to stay alive and in order to get food, right? Anyway, she published this book. She finished writing this book at the end of the war, and she tried to get it published in Germany, and the Germans wouldn't publish it. So it lay somewhere quietly until 1960 when the Americans published it. I've forgotten her name and I feel embarrassed by that, but it was an extraordinary tale, a very brave tale, but it was also a story about how women survived at the end of the war in the city, really, and I loved it. But the point about it that I want to make is that Germany wants to keep secret what its women were doing at the end of the war to survive. And you know, the sheet explains afterwards that they went out and they picked up buckets and they went around picking up rocks to begin rebuilding Berlin. And the women of Berlin rebuilt Berlin, you know, stone by stone, rock by rock. It's a fabulous tale. And I can't believe that for so long it was a secret. Now, we all have secrets, and in Britain we have big secrets too. And the biggest secret we have is about the financial system. We like to keep it very secret. It's so secretive that our economists don't even know about it. They don't teach money, they don't teach about banks, and they don't teach about debt. And they think money is something very abstract, far away. They don't deal with it. That's why the whole monetary system is a big, big secret. And unfortunately, the crisis sort of opened up the secret a bit. You know, when the Bank of England started to print money or to create money, they didn't even have to print it. People started to ask, where did that come from? And one of my favorite stories of the financial crisis is the one about Ben Bernanke, the governor of the Federal Reserve, who, in the first time in history, gives a television interview to the 60 Minutes show, the CBS's 60 Minutes show on a Sunday night. It's never happened before that a governor of a central bank has gone on television. And in the interview, the journalist says to him, now, Mr. Bernanke, where did you get the money from? Because the day before that, Mr. Bernanke had given AIG $84 billion. And this was only one tranche of several tranches given to AIG, to bail out AIG. You need to know that it was wrong that AIG even had an account with the central bank, because it was an insurance company. It should never have had an account with the Fed, okay. And the journalist says to him, now, Mr. Bernanke, where did you get that money from? Did you get it from taxpayers? Did you get it from the Treasury? And he said, no. He says, no. He says, we have at the Federal Reserve something that every commercial bank has got. It's called a computer. And we enter the numbers 84 billion, it has 11 digits, into the computer, and we transferred the money to AIG, right? Now, you need to know that banks have been doing this in Britain and in Holland and in Florence, in Italy, since about 1694, when the Bank of England was. It's not a secret. but it was kept as a very big secret about the creation of money. So I want to start my theme tonight with secrets. And the other big secret, and I feel strongly about it today, the 10th anniversary of the collapse of Lehman's, the other big secret is the role that Germany played in precipitating and exacerbating the global financial crisis. I get the impression that the Germans think this is an Anglo-American problem. We are prudent, you know, we are like that Swabian housewife. We're very careful with our money. And we've been very careful with our banking system. It's just those Brits and those Americans and their reckless Anglo-American financial system that have caused the crisis, not we Germans. No, we are prudent, sound, stable, right? And we don't mess with the financial system. So I want to start by talking about exactly how bad the Germans were when it came to financialization. And I don't want to do this to offend you. I want to do this because it's not healthy to have secrets. We've got to be open about this stuff if we want to fix the system. And I want to start, first of all, with a quote from a wonderful guy called Professor Joseph Vogel. Do any people here know Professor Vogel? He's a philosopher at Humboldt University. And he wrote recently, and it's such a powerful thing that he wrote, the financial markets were and are being refinanced through bailout packages, cheap money, and through brakes on government spending, deficit brakes. Despite all appearances, the recent collapse of the finance economy does not represent the end of an era. On the contrary, the crisis has proved itself as a way to solidify the existing economic order. In consideration of the current situation, he writes, one can thus argue that the financial and economic state of emergency in recent years has given rise to a form of government by the finance sector, that resembles a continuous coup d'etat. That's what has happened. We have suffered a coup d'etat by the finance sector since the crisis. And why? Because we have too many secrets. We have a secret about money. We have secrets about our role in the system. We have secrets about the role of our financial system. We have secrets about the role of our politicians and our regulators. We have to bring it out into the open in order for us to end this continuous coup d'etat, in order to change the current economic order. And I say this with some feeling, because I think we're not going to change it as long as we keep it a secret. So the German public like to think of the global financial crisis as Anglo-American. I have a date that is, for me, far more important than the 15th of September 2008. Lehman's was the culmination of the crisis. It was the end of the crisis. But the crisis had been rolling already for more than a year. And one of the horrors that I have is the crisis really began in 2006 in the subprime sector. The financial crisis broke on a day in August 2007, 9th of August 2007. And, of course, I was very conscious. I remember exactly where I was on the 9th of August 2007. It was a hell of a day. It was historically unprecedented day. It was much bigger than the 15th of September 2008. And that was because it was the day in which the banks froze their lending to each other. They stopped lending to each other. It was it's never happened in history before, right? And it was a very big shock to the system. So the reason it happened was because a particular bank, BNP Paribas, I think you pronounce it, issued a press release. And in that press release they said, the complete evaporation of liquidity in certain market segments of the United States security market has made it impossible to value certain assets fairly, regardless of their quality or credit rating. So assets are like collateral. When you buy a house, when you you take out a loan to buy a house, you offer collateral. You say, look, I have a small apartment in East Berlin, which used to not be worth very much, but today it's very valuable. This is my collateral, right? So an asset is collateral. So they said they could no longer fairly value assets or collateral. The situation is such that it's no longer possible to value fairly the underlying US asset-backed securities in 3 of the funds that we operate, and so we've closed down those funds. Now, you must imagine those funds would have had hundreds of millions of dollars in them, right? And the banks would have had money in those funds, pension funds would have had money in those funds, individuals were having money in that funds, and suddenly they're closed, they're gone. You can't get your money out, right? Panic ensued. The banks panicked. And they all said, if you can't trust the valuation of the collateral on your balance sheet, then I don't trust the valuation of his collateral on his balance sheet. And you are not trusting the valuation of the collateral on my balance sheet. We are going to fold our arms and we're going to stop lending to each other. And the system froze, utterly froze. How many people in this audience have heard about that? How many people know about the 9th of August 2007 and the freezing of interbank lending? There's got to be some clever clogs in the audience. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are some. Great. But most people don't know. Most people didn't even know that. It was a secret. The bankers kept it a secret. Because if the public had known, they too would have panicked. The central bankers kept it effectively a secret, right? The first bank to go down was a German bank, right? And it was the first central bank to step in and provide liquidity was the ECB that had to provide liquidity to the German banks, right? The German banks went first. So I'm going to read this out for the translators. So and Germany's Landesbanken and even its highly revered National Investment Bank, which is KfW, were deeply involved in subprime mortgages, in US asset-backed securities, okay? So there's a wonderful woman who's called Nina Eichaker, E-I-C-H-A-C-K-E-R, and I recommend that you follow her work. She's at Bentley University in the US. She's explained and has written an important paper on German financialization. So she explains that after the 1970s, German banks' trading activity, i.e. their wheeling and dealing on the financial markets, became to surpass their lending, their mortgage lending. That became a bigger share of their business from the 1970s onwards than mortgage lending. So after the 1970s, so the largest share of assets, while German firms increasingly borrowed in international capital markets rather than from domestic banks. German lawmakers in the 1970s eliminated state guarantees for the Landesbanken at the request of the private sector, who argued that it was unfair competition between the Landesbanken and the private sector. So the government, the politicians, the people we vote for, obliged the private sector and removed the state guarantees from the Landesbanken. With the elimination of guarantees, Landesbanks, despite their historic role as stable, non-profit providers of credit, had to compete with Germany's largest private banks. They had to compete for business. This was like minnows in a pond competing with sharks in the pond, right? So they had to, so changes in competition law restructured the German financial system. So in order to compete with the big banks, there were mergers and takeovers in the 1970s and 80s, especially in commercial banks and Landesbanken, and greater securitization and shadow banking relative to long-term lending increased German propensity for financial crisis, as securities, shares, and securitized debt constituted increasing percentages of German banks' assets and liquidity. This is a big secret. We have to talk about this. So throughout this period, interestingly, also, Germany lacked a centralized financial regulatory apparatus. must have been very convenient for the private sector. Only in 2002 did the Bundesbank establish the Bundesanstalt für Finanzdienstleistungsaufsicht, which is the Federal Financial Supervisory Authority known as BaFin. So, however, they could not keep pace with the new sources of financial and economic innovation and instability. So German desire for financial liberalization at the European level, meanwhile, helped increase potential systemic risk across Europe. Germany's negotiation power for the liberalization of European capital markets stemmed from its strong currency, of course. Germany demanded an independent central bank for the Union, which is not accountable to the people of Europe. Germany demanded the removal of capital controls and an expansion of the tasks that banks could conform within the European Monetary Union. It came from this country. So intra-EMU lending and borrowing subsequently increased. Asymmetries emerged between capital flows between Europe's core, the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands, to the periphery, Greece, Spain, Portugal. In 2007, Germany lent 1.23% of total GDP to Portugal, but this was 17% of Portugal's GDP. More extraordinary, Germany lent 6% of its GDP to Ireland, but this represented 84% of Ireland's GDP. In other words, German banks drowned these poor countries in money, in credit, in debt, and in particular their banks, okay? So this is very large. So European total debt as a percentage of GDP rose in this period. Financial debt relative to GDP grew particularly sharp in the core economies. So the new financialized liberal architecture of the Eurozone increased both the market for German financial services and overall it also increased systemic risk for the European Union. So on August 2007 Detonation Day, the first bank to go down after the BNP Paribas announcement was IKB, a specialist Mittelbanklender of which KfW was part owner. It collapsed in a heap of toxic US mortgage-backed securities. Now, how many people knew that in this audience? On August 2000, another one, yeah? I see a very clever woman sitting in this corner. So what was an SME lender doing investing in American toxic mortgages? We have to ask ourselves these questions. So it was bailed out by KfW, whose 2008 accounts show a loss of 1.2 billion euros directly attributed to the bank's failure, although some of it was recovered later. In September 2008, as Lehman Brothers collapsed, KfW transferred $426 million to Lehman Brothers. Why did they do that when Lehman Brothers was collapsing? This was a currency swap. So a currency swap exchanges the principal and interest payments on a loan in one currency for another currency. In other words, KfW was having to get dollars. And this was because KfW was lending money internationally and lending it in dollars. So after the crisis, KfW was still dealing with Lehman's. So in 2008 shows that KfW took losses of 2 billion euros due to the revaluation of its securities portfolio. What this means is that the assets on KfW's balance sheets were also not valued fairly. KfW is government guaranteed. It's not a private bank. So it can afford to lose all that value, that massive amount of value, because German taxpayers are backing it. So it was relying, it suffered terrific pressure in 2000. It was relying heavily on securitizations of its own loans for funding. When the securitization markets dried up, so did securitization income. And KfW's securitization of 19 billion euros in 2007 fell in value to 1.6 billion euros in 2008. There were other banks. And I could go on, and I've given the poor old translators a hard time with all of these notes. But I think I've made my point. And I'm not blaming anybody. The liberalization of the financial system did begin, in a sense, in the United States and in Britain. But I think it's important that we should understand that all of the major economies are deeply, deeply integrated in the global financial system. So if we don't understand that, we can't react to what's happening in the international financial system. If we keep ourselves remote, saying we are different and we are special, then it's possible for the actors in the financial system to continue to do what they're doing because the public doesn't know and doesn't understand. It's time for us to stop with the secrets. It's time for us to dig this up into the open and talk about it and talk about how we change it. We can't change anything that we don't understand. If we want to change something, we have to be able to dig it up out of the archives. We have to understand it, to dig it up, to see it. We have to make it transparent, and we have to understand it. Thank you very much.